it's become a disease in the United States, and it's just, it's like 100 years out of date. That's the problem. The very, very astute thinker Richard Barnett said that the tragedy of America is to have perfected the art of killing in the very century when it went out of fashion. Not that it went out of fashion in the sense that people don't do it. God knows they're doing it all the more. But in the sense that somewhere most people begin to realize this is not working. If they had even a glimmer of that there was an alternative, we could get out of this. Okay, let's take a look at a few pictures, because for the rest of the time I'll just be yakking here, and I want you to see these guys. If you could, Ahmed, the lights are over there. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, this is a picture of John's computer with our hero here in a very, this is characteristically how he appeared at the end of his life. Oh, our hero. I haven't told you that we have a hero today. His name is Lanza del Vasto, and when we're finished with the pictures, I'll give you more of the biographical information. Interestingly enough, he was born in 1901, the same year that André Trocmé was born in France, and we'll get back to that. This rather less distinguished-looking individual is Jean-Pierre Miller, who was a very well-known and very, very good, I think, nonviolence theorist. He wrote a book called Vous avez dit pacifisme? You said pacifism? And he's a really good Gandhian. And this is a man named Boulardière, who played an important role in anti-globalism struggles later. He's also an author. But this is a very typical look at our man, Lanza del Vasto. Right? I met him, because you knew I was going to say that. Right? I met him in San Francisco, probably about 1978. This is a homespun from sheep's wool made in his community. He looks kind of like a sage. I think he was trying to give that impression. He sort of deserved it. Okay, so now we have to shut this down. And yeah. So this, let me get you the exact year here, and then I'll start from the beginning and reconstruct the whole story so you can see where we're at. Okay. 3 seconds, huh? Just give me a minute here. Yeah, this is a campaign that went on from 1957 to 1963. It was an action against torture in Algeria. We've come across some very, very strange customs that barbaric people have all over the world. We ran across 2 nations where people didn't like voter fraud. And that's extremely strange. And here now we have people who have some kind of objection to torture. I don't know. If I were back in New York, I'd say, you got some kind of problem with that? But this was one of many issues that they were protesting. I guess that's about the best we can do for focus. Probably it's a very small picture. Yeah. Yeah. But what they did was they chained themselves in a ring around an obelisk in Paris, and they unfurled this banner saying, Nous aussi sont suspects. We're also suspects, because Algerians were being arrested just on the basis of their being Algerian, and held and interrogated. In the meantime, in the Kasbah in Algiers, guerrillas were being picked up and tortured. I don't know if any of you have seen that very, very disturbing, very compelling documentary called The Battle of Algiers. It's a very, very moving thing. It was quite a shock for Western Europe, because they had this ideology that there was this aberrant nation that sprang up in the middle of Europe, and it practiced torture, and that was not a European thing to do. And the good nations were all victims, like France and England. And within 10 years, France was practicing torture in Algeria, and within 20 more years, a certain nation is practicing it in Guantanamo, sending people around the world for extraordinary renditions. So this was very puzzling to people who maintained the traditional view of violence and nonviolence, namely that the ends and the means are completely separable. And if you use violence to overcome Hitler, then you would just go back to being a good guy. But Gandhi had said, this is one of the most disturbing and challenging things that he said. He was asked to predict whether the Allies would win in World War II, and he said they are going to win, but in order to do so, they will have to be more brutal than Hitler, because they have chosen to use his methods. So from the logic of nonviolence, this was all perfectly predictable, but there you go again. Nobody asks us. A mob descended on Belgrade, yada, yada, off we go. So this is prior to the issue that we're going to be talking about. It shows you that these people, I'll tell you more in a bit who these people are. I think we had one more. Yeah, 2 more actually. Yeah, this is another picture of Lanza del Vasto. It's quite unusual in that he's wearing a sport coat. He almost never did that, but I guess they wanted his picture for a book jacket. He was a pretty successful writer. One of his books should be somewhere on this messy desk of mine. Yeah, Warriors of Peace. There's his picture. Okay, now then to just orient ourselves geographically, we'll show the last one, Carte France département. Yeah, this is, as you know, France is divided into 82 départements, or departments. It's done by one of the many things that we have to be grateful to Louis Napoleon for. That's the only one that I can think of. And this is the Dordogne, this region here. The Pyrenees start here. And interestingly enough, Haute-Loire is right here, and that's where the Chambon had unfolded during World War II. And that's why I say it's kind of an interesting coincidence. André Trocmé, who's going to be the leader here, was born in 1901. Lanza del Vasto, who's going to be the leader here, was born in 1901 in Italy, partly Italian and partly noble, partly Italian, partly Austrian, but both nobility families. Well, okay, I think this kind of sets the scene. Now let's get on with the story. Sorry about that. Here. Okay, so. I choose this event, and we're having a slight change of pace here. I'm not going to do this with a movie or anything, and I haven't given you much to read about it. I just thought I would try to walk you through it. So that means that when we come to something interesting, let's stop and discuss it, as opposed to noting it down and having to talk about it later on. All of this contingent on our chalk supply, which is sort of like, very good, Joanna, thank you. You must be a science major. Good. Okay. So his full name, if you're interested, is Giuseppe Giovanni Lanza del Vasto. Okay, and his dates are 1901 to 1981. He died at 80. André Trocmé died at 70 in 1971. And he's often referred to as Gandhi's first disciple in the West. In 1936, he was studying art, and he was pretty good at it, but he began to feel that something was missing. Another famous art student failed art student from that era is Adolf Hitler. It's another one of these funny little coincidences. Anyway, he decided to go to the land of wisdom. So in late of 1936, like Michael Schuck, he betook himself to India, and some others of you also, in order partly to meet Gandhi because he was the one person who knew how to get rid of violence. And he spent a lot of time with Gandhi in 1937, and Gandhi will actually bestow on him the name Shantidas, which is mostly how he is known subsequently. And Shantidas means servant of peace. Shanti, peace, Das, servant. And after spending a good bit of time, he takes a pilgrimage to the holy river Ganga, the Ganges, and he has something of a vision, sort of like Constantine at the Malvian Bridge, and his vision is go back and build. So he decided to go to southern France, probably because it was felt to be a very hospitable area. Southern France was, I would say, the San Francisco of Europe. Let's put it that way. Un grand accueil, everybody was welcome there. And he went to set up a community with Gandhi's assistance, and he does that in 1948. And this community is basically a flop. It doesn't work. I should say that then this community was called the Community of the Ark, Communauté de l'Arche, and it didn't last very long. So these are the key dates. 1937 with Gandhi. 1948, first attempt to start a community, which leads to échec total, complete flop. And in 57 to 63, he is involved in the torture Algerian issue. I'll just pretend you're Algiers. One of the last gasps of old-fashioned colonialism in North Africa by European powers. We have much more sophisticated forms of colonialism today. That's part of our problem. Incidentally, I'm sort of interrupting myself. You're used to that by now. In that film, there's a very stunning episode where the general who's in charge of the operations in Algiers, General Massoud, historical figure, he's being challenged by these journalists who come down from Paris and say, we understand you're practicing torture here. And he says, look, you guys, you sent me here to do a particular kind of job. Sent me here to do a job. Et vous devez en accepter toutes les conséquences. You have to accept all the consequences for what you do. You cannot send me out here and say, defeat this country, but be nice. Once you send me out here to do it, I'm going to do it any way that I can, and you are going to bear the full responsibility for the methods that I use. Okay, so you can see why Del Vasto, who is a very serious Catholic. This is one of the reasons that there isn't a whole lot of connection between Tocquenay, who's only a few, maybe 400 or 500 kilometers away, and Del Vasto. Tocquenay's community is Protestant. Of course, that was part of the thing. It was a Huguenot department. But he's a very serious Catholic, and he in fact said later on, I went to Gandhi in order to become a better Christian. Which was very smart. It shows you he had a modern understanding of what religions are. Then in 1958, France announces that it's doing the first atomic bomb, and they carried out protest actions. And this will be quite significant for the development of anti-militarism in Europe, because throughout the 70s and the 80s, it's going to really reach a very dramatic climax around questions of the basing of middle-range, what do they call them, strategic nuclear missiles in Europe. And in fact, it was a very important organization in Holland, IKFAL, the International Church Union in Holland, which started these anti-nuclear protests in the early 80s, partly after consultations with General Ellsberg. So it just shows you once again how people can seed each other with key ideas at the key moment, get it into the right institution, in this case the churches, and it can take off. Okay, then in 1963, wrapping up the Algerian things, he undertakes a fast in Rome to demand that the Vatican Council condemn weapons of mass destruction in the acknowledgement of nonviolence. I think I translated that correctly. But anyway, nonviolence has got to be accepted by the Council, and they've got to come out against mass destructive weapons. You might say that this was another échec, another failure, but in fact in 1983, the American Catholic bishops, joined by French Catholic bishops and the German Catholic bishops, all issued a statement called God's Challenge and Our Response, saying that nuclear weapons could not be justified under just war teaching, as it has come down to us from Ambrose Augustine and all the rest of them. For one thing, proportional means is absurd if you're dropping an atomic bomb on people, and so therefore they were willing to accept it as a temporary measure while an actual policy could be developed. Of course, that's the problem. Once you've got a nice temporary umbrella, you go to sleep, there's no policy, it's the same old, same old. But then we come down to 1972, so this is the fast in Rome, and there'll be several such. And here's where the story I particularly want to focus on begins, and that's what I'm calling the Larzac Satyagraha. Just to give you an idea of what other things the Community of the Ark went on to do. This will last 9 years, by the way, 1972 to 1981. 76 to 79, there were more anti-nuclear actions. 1983, by this time Del Vasto is gone, and there's a fast in Rome to renew the demand about the condemnation of nuclear weapons, and that's exactly the year when the Catholic bishops did come out with a statement saying that, well, they're okay for the time being. In 1987, the same community, I'm going to say a little more about the community in a bit, the community got involved in an indigenous struggle, namely the Kanak people who were not on their geographical turf at all. So this is, here we see, just picking up all the threads of all the dimensions of the great anti-globalism struggle. They find themselves going from one to the next. In 1990, they again tried to stop nuclear weapons. In 1991, they carried out a fast in Paris on the occasion of the Gulf War, and they had an interreligious prayer ceremony there in Paris, which has become one of the fairly characteristic events or happenings that will take place at nonviolent uprisings these days. And 1992 to 1995, various actions for peace in former Yugoslavia, and 1995, they joined with a very important Catholic radical organization called Pax Christi to have another interreligious prayer service at UNESCO on the 50th anniversary of Hiroshima. And I'm afraid that's where my information ends. I don't know what they have been doing for the last 10 years, but I do know the community is still in existence. So this community was started in 1963. Communauté de l'Arche. They bought 1,200 acres in an area called La Borinode, which is in the Rhone Valley. In other words, it's an area that is famous for beavers and what would that be? That wouldn't be Chardonnay from Rome. I don't know, what kind of wine would they be making over there? It's red anyway, and it's darn good, but I can't remember what kind it is. Okay, let's see, a couple things. Now, I have to go back a little bit to give you the background for what's going to happen next. In an area that was not far from their community, way back in 1903, the government had set aside 3,000 hectares. I think hectares are a little bit larger than acres. No, a little bit smaller actually. This is like 2. No, I'm sorry, I take it back. I go back to my first guess. They're way bigger than acres. 2.4 acres per hectare. So 3,000 hectares is about 10,000 acres, has been set aside in 1903 for a military training field. Okay, tant pis alors. So okay, that's going on. But in the January of 1971, the government announces that it's going to, October of 1970, the government announces that it's going to expand this thing from 3,000 to 17,000 hectares. This is a huge land grab on the part of the government in 1970, when militarism is really not all that popular among people. And this would have put at risk, hold on to your seats now, this is going to be very serious, 325 tons of Roquefort cheese every year. So that means we'd be completely dependent on Holland for our cheese, which would be okay with me. I think their stuff is pretty good, until California, of course, will come along and try to get into the act. But seriously, there were 575 people who have their livelihood just taken right out from under them. This whole area is sheep grazing, and sheep's milk being made into Roquefort is going on for centuries. So there are some protests, as is natural and acceptable, but in response to the protests in January of the following year, the government digs in and says, okay, you don't like 17,000? Try 20. We're going to expand this and take away more land. And it's finally at this point, early in 1972, that they called upon Lanza del Vasto, who was a Gandhian disciple. And so you see once again a very familiar pattern, and kind of a very successful one, where the leader does not invent the issue. It's like Martin Luther King coming in and sort of putting his stamp of approval on the lunch counter sit-ins that were started by 4 students from the University of Greensboro, North Carolina. It's actually pretty common that the issue comes up on the ground, and the leader comes in to help organize it, inspire people, frame it, teach how to go about it. So in this case, he's kind of a classic example of a third-party expert coming in, because he, basically he's almost indistinguishable from a Frenchman at this point. I think in southern France, they probably would have accepted him. Once you get up around Paris, you have to be Parisian for about 3 generations before you'll be regarded as a French person. But I think in the south, it's a little bit different. And so he's basically French, but he's deliberately bringing Gandhi into play. And he feels that this community, which he has set up in '63, is going to be an extremely important part of this, and all those of you who had Pax 164A will not be the slightest bit surprised. You'll be delighted, but not surprised, because this is a discovery that Gandhi made already in South Africa. 1904, 1910, he starts his first 2 communities in South Africa, later to be called ashrams when he goes to India, and we discussed at length why they're so important. The basic reason that I'd like to leave you with here is, from the 70s onward, it's becoming slowly clear that for some reason, big institutions aren't working. Corporate bookstores, corporate coffee, corporate healthcare, corporate universities. You have this wonderful thing, oh boy, the university just got $500 million to study alternative energy. That's terrific, till you discover that alternative energy means nuclear, genetically modified, all these things. Yes, this is going to be called the UC Satyagraha is shaping up here. But anyway, so the point that I'm making is, and I don't know why this is the case, but I think I do know why. For some funny reason, the big institutions, which are hierarchical, top-down, based on domination, and ones in which the human individual doesn't count for much, they're not working anymore. Because in all these big institutions, you have a department called Human Resources, right? We've all heard about that. And it's very casual. I work in HR. I'm an HR person. Now, if Immanuel Kant were to come back here, if we had a huge copy of the Die Kritik der reinen Vernunft, and we wave a candle over it and he would be invoked, and we'd ask him, how do you feel about human resources? He would be furious. Anyway, as furious as he could get. And he would say that a human being should never be treated as a means to an end. A human being is an end in himself. And we would even go on to say a human being is an end in herself. So the reduction of the human being to a functionary in a non-human entity has its limits, and if you go about it the wrong way, it just will not work anymore. So therefore, whole new forms of living and being together, new communities that are not dependent on nation states, and you can live close to nature and things like that, are critical nuclei from which the new world that I hope you end up living in is going to come. So he defined his community as a voluntary association of converted persons. In his case, that meant converted to the basic principles of the Christian faith. That's meant in his case. And here is the charter of the Ark. Following Gandhi and Lanza del Vasto, the members of the Ark have made the choice of nonviolence, which is rooted in what we call inner work. Work on oneself, Napierian person power, and on a spiritual, let's see, recherche means research, but it also means pursuit, spiritual pursuit. Yeah. They choose. And there are 4 basic things. To